You're listening to Threads. My name's Luke Fraser, and this is the Tonic.
Ապրիկսան 4-ին առավոտը գերտան կերեզմանները ապտեղ մադուրի շուչ կհավակնենք աղոտքով հետոնամավարությամբ այդ շրջանին մի քանի օր աղոտքներեն ներս հայկական աղոտքներ մեծ հայրս այս իմ արունից դերը աղոտքնության այնտեղից սերուտ շարունակենք, հիշենք, չմոռանանք, որտեղ հայաբահբաման հարց ունենք միան ապրիկսան 4-ի Արդյունքի հարց չէ, մենք գներվենք ու հուզվենք ճիշտ է մեր մեզի պատահածներով, բայց որ վերածնված ասկ ենք, մենք տակավին գաբրենք, մենք տակավին գանք, ինչ-որ ասված է, որ պիտի սպանեն մինչև վերջին հայը, մենք սասուցի մշկեղ իմ մեծ հայրս եղել է իշխան շարը Իշխան շարուն դա իմ որս ինեցել։ Բայց նույն ատեմ կոյատևման հաղթանակ ունենք, թեր ներկա ենք, թեր գանք, թեր բահանջ ունենք, հավություն ուզենք։
Մեծ մայրս այսին չարցիադեն ուղղայի։
Պատրաստիկ ներմունչունների միջոցով հայ ոգիով մեծով, հայ հոգիով մեծով սերունդս մենք կպատրաստենք։
Ապրիլ 24
մեծ հայրս երկուքն եղած են անքարվեն, ծախսին անքարվեն, աքսորված է ուղագի հալը։
Եկեղեցիներով բաները, առաջնորդները բաները, անի մեջ, կերեզմանի մեջ
դատիկն, ուրեմն 15 թվականին իմ նախահայրերս մորս կողմեն եկած են Մարաշեն, հորս կողմեն եկած են Բուրսային։
Վերջերս թերատ մուսլիման քաղաքի մեջ ապրելով մուսլիմանները նույնիսկ սկսան փոցել ապրիլ 24-ին եւ դեսեին որ
իմ ծնողքս բաբայիս կողմեն, որս կողմեն մուսալերան իսկ մամայիս կողմեն սկանդարոնից նորեն հաստատվեցան հալել
մեկնենես ջորաբլոս կսենք, մեկնենես ուրֆային է Բաբաս բերեջի գծներ է, ինքը ուրֆացի է, բայց բերեջի գծներ է։
Սկիզբի չէին կոցել, այս վերջին դարիներուն ամեն ապրիլ 24-ին օրը կոցել։ Մենք մեր ռեստորան, այսինքն ճաշարանը, գրեթե դարին 364 օր բաց էին, ոչ քրիստոնյաներ ուզալու, ոչ արաբներ ուզալու։ Ինձ մայրս ուրֆային կացել է, չարդի ժամանակ, 364 չէ հալեպասել ենք չէ ուչներան։
Մեծ հայրս, ուրեմն գրխան կոչեցյալ եղեգա, իսկ իր լիգինը մեծ մամայիս կողմնած զեյթունին կաստաց, այրայ։
Իմ մամաս 1917-ին ծնվել է, ալենի մեծան, իմ մամաս աչարդը չտեսեց, բայց բաբասան կիլսել է, մամայի կսանդեց է, իսկ բաբաս կիլսել է, շատ ավոր վետ չեք կողմով։ Իմը այս բագերազմիչ
Սասունեն են, սասունցին, արտեսալիրեն ծախում կապչեցին սուրիենիկը, հանեբիգան։
Kiriz, Türkiye'ye mi yıka? Mamam kızıga yığıla, yes yığıla.
Սեղասպանությունն առաջ իմ հայրս և մայրս եկած են Թուրքիային, հկայացին, անտևին եկած են, ուրեմն դեղավորված են հալեր Թուրքիայի նազագեցին։
Հայրս, բաբայիս կողմը ամեն խարպետին եկած են, բայց մամայիս կողմը կիլսիվ անտև կարնով անտևին եկած են, հալեր
Հայրական կողմս ավելի սահմանագից քաղաք էին, ապում է քիլից քաղաքից էր, իսկ
հայրական կողմս յուզղատ քաղաքից եղած, յուզղատ մենթեշե քյուլից։
Դեդես անունստերով Վարտանյանից Բիտլիս քաղաքերին։
Իմ նախահայրերս այսինքն Զեյթուն Գաբրիել Թուրքիո մեջ։ Ուրեմն անտեղին է մեր բաները, արմատները։
Իրեն հարկադրելով դրեկուսի։ Բայց մինչև նա իրեն ուսած արդեն ներմիտ։
That is the opening of the first piece, Rerouted, taken from the debut album by Joseph Bohigian, an Armenian-American composer who grew up within the Armenian exile community of Fresno, California. He's been establishing a body of work that focuses on issues of memory, cultural reunification, and diaspora, and through an ongoing interest in re-establishing a relationship with lost elements of the past, his music often makes use of archival materials like sound recordings, interviews, and written texts that he weaves into hybrid forms. Rerouted takes as its source the recordings of testimonies of Syrian Armenian refugees, tracing the history of around a dozen families from their expulsion during the Armenian genocide in the early 20th century through the rebuilding of their lives and community in Syria. And whilst Armenians have lived in Syria for centuries, and it's been a key centre of the diaspora since the Armenian genocide, the destruction of the community brought about by the war in Syria led many of its members to repatriate to Armenia, though it is an Armenia quite different in geography, language, and culture than the one their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents fled a century earlier. Their stories here then reflect the resilience of a community defined by exile, along with the realities of a displacement that led back to the homeland. As one of the interviewees, Annie Avakian, relays in the piece, it is not only about April 24th, that's Armenian Genocide Memorial Day. It is not about tears. We are sad, we are emotional. It's true what happened to us, but we have been reborn. We are still living. We are still here. As a piece, I found it both moving and a little unsettling. And despite the long drones, there is a more restless energy and texture created by the intercutting of the interviewees, making the spoken word act as though an instrument in its own right. And there is some really good dynamic interplay between those two elements. Released on the San Francisco-based label Other Minds in November of last year, in the midst of an ongoing genocide against Armenians at the hands of the Azerbaijani regime, the album The Water Has Found Its Crack arrives with a heightened sense of cultural and political relevance. The August Quartet, who you heard playing there, are Clara Kim and Giancarlo Latta, violins, Maren Rothfritz, viola, and Marielle Roberts, cello. That was 0.8 ice from an album 14 years in the making by San Francisco-based composer, performer, field recordist, and instrument builder Cheryl E. Leonard. It's called Antarctica, Music from the Ice, and it comes out of a 5-week stint spent at the Palmer Research Station in 2009 as a participant in the National Science Foundation's Antarctic Artists and Writers program. At this remote outpost on the Antarctic Peninsula, she made field recordings of ice, water, wind, and wildlife, whilst also gathering rocks, shells, and penguin bones, which she later fashioned into the bone idiophones and sculptural percussion instruments that are featured on this album. Back home, she also sifted through hours of field recordings to reveal sonic qualities of the stones, bones, and shells that she had gathered on her journey. Some of these objects worked as found instruments in their own right, while others were fashioned into elaborate sculptural forms in order to enhance the sounds that she heard within them. All of these elements were then stitched together into 8 carefully crafted pieces on the album. And in listening, it's often hard to know where field recording ends and instrumental performance begins, such as the degree of environmental symbiosis between them. Her time spent at the station also revealed alarming transformations already well underway in local ecosystems. Even to a first-time visitor, the effects of climate change were palpable. New islands unveiled by retreating glaciers, increasing populations of sub-Antarctic seals and penguins, beds of moss and grass in areas that had historically been buried under snow and ice. Bearing in mind as well that this was back in 2009 and that since then the effects of man-made climate change have only increased at a seemingly exponential rate. So in listening to the album, you're aware not only of its complete uniqueness, how many of us will ever step foot on that continent, for example, but also that her work documents and artistically evokes an Antarctica that may already no longer exist. It's an album that rewards deep listening and which acts variously as document, artistic statement, and warning. Antarctica, Music from the Ice was released on Other Minds in 2022. for all the fans out there of 45-second reverb, all natural, of course. That was Morning Light, taken from Berkeley, California native Stuart Dempster's latest release, entitled Underground Overlays from the Cistern Chapel. The pun there reflects the colloquial name given to the facility at Fort Worden State Park in Port Townsend, Washington State, with its capacity to hold 2 million gallons of water. And it's where he previously recorded alongside Pauline Oliveros and Panayotis as part of the Deep Listening Band on 1989's seminal release, Deep Listening. Now, as then, he performs on trombone, conch shell and didgeridoo, alongside directing the ensemble of 9 other trombonists that you heard on that piece. I'm not quite sure who they are. Hopefully they didn't get lost down there at any rate. He's described being in the cistern as feeling that this is where you have been forever and will always be forever. He's a key figure who I have to admit I didn't know much about until recently. He played in and organised both the first performance and first recording of Terry Riley's In C, and he's something of a pioneer in the development of trombone technique, publishing his landmark book, The Modern Trombone, a definition of its idioms, in 1979. He was also apparently the first to introduce the didgeridoo to North American audiences. Anyhow, Underground Overlays from the Cistern Chapel, just released on Imprec, is something to really dig into as a listen. It's by turns ambient and pretty blissful, and the natural acoustics are captured so well on this disc.
I look for traces, I look for traces, I look for traces, I look for traces, traces of her, traces of her, traces of her footsteps.
It seems my heart is frozen. Her face will fade away. the doorway there is a well. A linden tree stands there. Many times I've sought its shade, a place of rest and pleasant dreams. When dreaming there, I carve some words of love, some words of love, some words of love upon the bar. But I still hear it whisper, 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 whisper. Come, 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 come. Find peace, peace, peace with. My tears have left deep marks in the snow, deep marks in the snow, deep marks in the snow. The cold flakes absorbing all my sorrows, 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 sorrows. Snow, you know of my yearnings. Tell me, where do you go? 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 Take my tears with you. 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 As you flow to the stream. Flow to the stream. Flow to the stream. Flow to the stream. He's now your winter prison. He's now your winter prison. He's now your winter prison. I'll ride upon your cover, ride upon your cover, ride upon your cover, ride upon your cover. A day and a time, a day and a time, a day and a time, a day and a time. Does my heart see your image in this river, 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 your.
I have to say, the record that is from, now a few years old, just completely blew me away when I first heard it last month. Written in 2017, the piece is called The Cold Trip Part 1, with the movements played being Feeling Numb, The Linden Tree, Flood of Tears, and River. It's by the Austrian composer, improviser, and software designer Bernhard Lang, and it's the 32nd installment of his epic monadology cycle, now over 40 installments large, I think, which can be classed in his own terms as meta-compositions, being based as they are on snatches of original scores from the history of various musics from over the last 1100 years or so. In this particular case, the source material is Schubert's Winterreise, with part 1 that you heard those movements from being scored for voice and for guitars, and part 2, also on the same album, being for voice, piano, and laptop, playing an array of chopped and screwed samples. The earlier pieces in the series used specially written software to process the musical cells, what he calls monads, derived, I think, from Leibniz's monadology. Basically, the software would break down and then reassemble the fragments with the help of cellular automata and granulators. But by the point of the cold trip, it seems he had internalized the nature of the software to such an extent that he more or less freestyled the editing based on accumulated understanding of what it would do. It typifies whilst also being distinct from a huge body of compositions he has built up, with a particular emphasis on music theatre, and this is inherently dramatic, narrative, classical music, and yet, not to create false oppositions, it can also be viewed the other way round, as a fractured form of popular music. It's the marrying together, I think, of repetitions, loops, and moments of consonance on the one side, with astringent harmonies and oddball tunings on the other, in a way that reminds me of the work of the Wet Ink Ensemble and composers like Eric Wobbles, and that I think would be the envy of any progressive left-field inclined avant rock group. I can't help feeling it's just some of the most interesting non-classical classical music out there. And I just love the guitar writing and playing here. One of them is steel guitar. You can hear that customary twang throughout. He manages to get an astonishing array of timbres, reference points, and moods out of them. It seems to morph between genres like grunge, metal, industrial, folk, and classical, without in any way being arch or affected about it. The blend feels unforced and completely natural, no doubt due in part to the fact that he was by this point just so well tuned to his own processes. Just great stuff. That was performed by Sarah Maria Sun, soprano, and the Aleph Guitar Quartet, who are Andres Hernandez, Tilman Reinbach, Wolfgang Seringer, and Christian Wernicke. And the album, The Cold Trip, was released on Kairos in 2017.
Seatbelt, 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 seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt,
seatbelt, seatbelt,
seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt,
seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt, seatbelt Chum chum quack quack bone, 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 chum chum
quack quack
cryptic
quack
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 cryptic quack, cryptic quack quack, 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 cryptic quack, chum quack quack, cryptic quack, cryptic quack quack, cryptic quack, cryptic quack quack, chum quack, cryptic quack, chum cryptic quack, cryptic quack, chum quack quack, bone, chum quack quack, cryptic bone, chum quack quack, cryptic bone, chum quack quack, bone, chum quack quack, bone, chum quack quack, cryptic 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 chum quack quack, bone, chum quack quack, bone, chum quack bone, cryptic chum quack cryptic bone, cryptic chum quack cryptic bone, chum quack bone, cryptic chum quack bone, chum quack bone, chum quack bone, chum quack bone, chum quack cryptic bone, chum quack bone, chum quack bone, chum quack
chum, 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 quack, quack, chum, 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 quack, quack, chum, 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 quack, quack, chum, 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 cryptic quack, chum, 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 cryptic quack, chum, 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 quack, quack, bone, chum, quack,
cryptic,
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 bone, chum, quack, bone,
That was, yes, Seatbelt, Seatbelt, from the US Armenian composer, sound poet, and radio producer Charles Armenian's classic 1980 release, Lexical Music, that has come to be regarded as something of a cornerstone of the then nascent text sound poetry scene. From Fresno, California, he originally majored in business studies before switching to English and finally experimental literature via the Interdisciplinary Studies Department, the first of its kind in the country, at San Francisco State University. His thesis was tellingly on visual scores for performance in any medium. He said that the idea was that you could subjectively interpret any part of the score at any time, and you could do it in any medium. You could use the score as a film or as a piece of choreography. You could, if you wanted to, use it to shop for groceries. He was also both a percussionist and a prolific radio broadcaster and producer, in particular at KPFA in Berkeley, and one of the first in the country, perhaps the first in fact, to play the music of Steve Reich on air. And whilst his radio presenting helped polish his speaking voice and fed into the vocal style of his text sound works, you can also hear the influence of the early Reich phase pieces in Seatbelt, Seatbelt, definitely the most explicitly Reichian on that album. Recorded in Berkeley at the 1750 Arch Studios in 1973, it features the voices of Armenian, John Doikers, Carl Goldstein, Janice Gittek, and Susan Napper, and it's constructed from 27 tape loops deployed in various configurations across 3 parts. In it, individual words lose all referential meaning through repetition, becoming pure sound, whilst nonsense phrases like chum chum, quack quack, bone build into intricate loops. And acoustic space, as ever, is a factor in our comprehension or lack thereof. The humour throughout is dry and pretty absurdist, but in a playful rather than self-consciously satirical way. For me, it makes this piece and others by him have a sense of vitality that can perhaps sometimes be lacking in the text sound genre. It's also fundamentally musical, well, at least to my ears anyway, and yes, I know how subjective and unquantifiable that term is, We're never going to stop using it to justify our own tastes and inspirations, though, I guess. For his part, he said that I see my work as maybe 10% more on the musical side. It's maybe 60% music and 40% literature. I feel that the sound of it and the rhythm and timbres are all part of the experience. And in its fundamental playfulness, we can, I think, enjoy it on its own unique terms. The album Lexical Music was re-released on Other Minds in 2017. I love both the sublime harmonies and part writing in those two movements, as well as the production, somewhere between realistic and, I don't know, hyperreal. Based on writings by the 10th century Armenian mystical poet and monk Gregory of Narek, specifically I think the Book of Lamentations, they're part of a work called Zain by Varam Sargsyan, an Armenian-Canadian composer, conductor, and singer currently based in Montreal. It's a 5-movement work, of which you heard there movements 1, Zain, and 4, Yeltsi. I don't, alas, know a great deal more about it, or who the singers on the recording are, but its harmonic and sonic qualities just really pulled me in. Gorgeous all round. The album, Zain, was self-released on streaming platforms in 2023. brilliantly bracing. That's 2022's Not One, Not Two by Austrian composer, organist, improviser, and teacher Klaus Lang, no relation to Bernhard earlier. And what was that instrument? Something that until very recently languished only in the dusty cabinets of a museum, the Czech Museum of Music in Prague, to be precise. It's a sixth-tone harmonium, the brainchild of Czech microtonal music pioneer Alvar Haber in the 1920s, and an instrument that reached its full evolution a decade later. Though apparently quite obsessed with it, he designed it as a demonstration tool for his students and never considered it a proper instrument. And a bit like mavericks such as Julian Carrillo, his forward-thinking ideas concerning microtones apparently found little traction during his lifetime. I'm assuming it does what it says on the tin, in that each key is tuned a sixth of a tone away from the next. That is a pretty unusual tuning. We're relatively accustomed to quarter tones being just the equal division in two of the standard equal temperament semitone, but sixth tones, of course, would break each semitone into three rather than two, giving greater potential for microtonal inflection of both melody and harmony. And yes, as far as I know, there is only one of these instruments in existence and only one person who can play it. He is the otherwise pianist Miroslav Beinhauer. He'd taken part in a premiere of Haber's sixth tone opera, Come Thy Kingdom, in 2018, and the recording of his 6 compositions for sixth tone harmonium, Opus 37, which was the only solo composition for this instrument in existence for more than 90 years. Well, until now, that is. The experience led Beinhauer to master the instrument and eventually commission new work for it. So in the last 3 years, new repertoire for sixth tone harmonium has been written both by Czech and international composers, including the likes of Phil Niblock, Bernhard Lang, and Judith Bergson, of whom more in a bit. And so we now have this new release just put out on Sub Rosa entitled Pieces for Sixth Tone Harmonium. There's some great pieces on it, but Lang stood out to me in particular for its combination of drones and microtonal inflection that seems to bend and twist oral reality before our ears. And is it just me, or do I get a faint sense of, yes, bagpipes about it? Anyhow, I recommend the whole album for some ear-bending explorations with this much neglected instrument. That is Anger, off the latest release by New York-based cellist and composer Clarice Jensen, entitled Aesthesis. She's become pretty well known and highly regarded, both for her solo albums and her soundtrack work, which blend cello and electronics, often via the use of looping and incremental effects. 2019's The Experience of Repetition is Death, in particular, attracted some pretty rave reviews. Add to which she's collaborated with more or less everyone: Johan Johansson, Max Richter, Bjork, Nico Muhly, Michael Stipe, even Taylor Swift. It's certainly music that touches a sweet spot for many. This album, though, is something of a departure in that it features much less of her cello than previously. It's conceptually structured around the emotional and harmonic spectrum, and in particular the phenomenon of chromesthesia, the condition whereby sound evokes an experience of colour, shape, and movement. Originally conceived in pre-pandemic times as a concert event and structured around a series of long drones, each centered on a single pitch, these drones were to be punctuated by shorter pieces, each depicting one of the 7 principal emotions defined in the Li Ji, or Chinese Book of Rites. She apparently envisaged the audience being bathed in coloured lights that corresponded to each drone, with those colours combined or oscillating during the songs in an effort to mimic or perhaps even induce chromesthesia. Anyhow, the pandemic put paid to those plans, and she instead decided to carry out the project as a studio album. And I think it's these shorter pieces that have been carried forward to this release. Each is named after an emotion, so here we have Anger. For me, it's probably the best on the album. It has a little grit to it, and the dynamic arc is so perfectly controlled. The text is taken from cut-ups of Simone de Beauvoir's letters to her lover Nelson Algren in 1947, in which she relates a storm in the country and an evening in which she drank to excess at a dinner party. When I am drunk, everything seems very tragic and pathetic and terrifying to me, so dreadfully important, and yet without importance, since death is at the end. I want everything from life. I want to be a woman and to be a man, to have many friends and to have loneliness, to work much and write good books, and to travel and enjoy myself, to be selfish and to be unselfish. You see, it is difficult to get all which I want, and then, when I do not succeed, I get mad with anger. Well, drink responsibly, kids. That was performed by Laura Lutzke, Francesca Federico, and Emma Broughton, voices, with Clarice Jensen providing electronics. The album Aesthesis was released on 130701 in 2022.
They
A second outing for Schubert there on this show, this time reinterpreted by LA-based mezzo-soprano, pianist and composer Judith Berkson, going under the moniker of Liederkreis. That was Doppelganger, and it opens her 2021 album Liederkreis 2. And as you will have no doubt deduced, it's the second installment of her Liederkreis project, which reimagines the Lieder by the likes of Schubert and Schumann, with harmonium and a vocal that is usually electronically augmented or manipulated, these being interspersed with purely electronic pieces of a pretty experimental bent. The resulting atmosphere is dark and eerie, seeming to amp up the gothic qualities of the original Lieder even more. Here's one more track, a reading of Schumann's beautiful Auf einer Burg, on a castle.
Fell asleep while keeping watch, an ancient night sits while sleeping in the distance. Rain is falling, and the forest trees are rustling. Inward grows is near, and there his armored suit has turned to stone. He sits for many 100 years alone, and in his silent outside it is still and peaceful. Everyone moved to the valley. Little woodbirds sing together in the shady window arches. Down below, wedding party in the sunshine on the river, music playing, sweet and loudly, and a lovely bride is
That was Castle, Judith Berkson's reworking of Schumann's beautiful Liederkreis, Opus 39, for her own electronically processed voice. The album Liederkreis 2 was released on Notice Recordings in 2021. At Dawn by the New York artist, composer and performer Sara Dittrich, and it's taken from her 2018 release Metal Ether. She's a fascinating artist who utilizes woodwind instruments, multi-channel speaker arrays, free improvisation, and creative misuses of audio technology applied to field recording and sampling across a unique body of work. She has a string of releases at this point, the most recent being a collaboration with Ben Vida, who was featured on the last episode of this show. That's well worth a listen, along with the rest of her albums, but it's this one, recorded in a former military base in Le Havre, that I've come back to, and this closing piece in particular, that just has something of an ineffable quality for me, reminding me of the work of Eliane Radigue, perhaps, in its slow-moving setting of mood and general ambience. And like Radigue's work, it is both ambient in a sense, without collapsing into being reassuring. There is something unsettling and ambivalent there. I happen to be mixing the audio for this show in a quiet spot in the country, and only sometime after the end of the piece did I realise that it was over, that the birdsong I was hearing outside my window was in fact not the birdsong on the track. The two had been duetting throughout in one of those strange moments of symbiosis between performance and environment. It felt Cagean in that the music was opening itself out to and augmented by the environment, rather than being separated away from it. That album, Metal Ether, was released on NNA Tapes in 2018. Right, once again we find ourselves near the end of the show. The Tonic will be back on the 12th of June, and as usual you can check the show's Instagram page for confirmation of that, _Tonic_. Do send me a message at any point via Instagram or the tonic.online if you like, where you can find access to all previous episodes of the show across a range of streaming platforms, along with an archive of all the artists and recordings featured each time. Thanks once again to everyone at Threads, to Gabe, Freddie, Rosie and Lee, and thanks to you for listening. I'm Luke Fraser. See you next time.